Now, first things first, I'm having these discussions with people. The talking point now that's going around. Trump's had 25 lawsuits, all but one have been tossed and laughed out of the courtroom. Now, am I wrong in thinking, and am I wrong? I don't think I'm wrong. Those 25 lawsuits were not all Trump lawsuits. Some of them were citizen lawsuits. Of the ones of Trump's lawsuits that were kicked out of court, by and large, the majority of them were because the issue had become academic. It was about observation on the night of the election. The judgments came out and said, look, the count is done, the damage is done, so we're dismissing it because it has no object. So that's sort of a very academic, non-substantive dismissal of a lawsuit that was time sensitive, and that is no longer time sensitive because the time has passed. Of the other ones, it's been a question of standing, as you pointed out on Twitter, which, specifically the one in Pennsylvania that was dismissed in a judgment that I qualified as strawmanning what was being asked for by the plaintiffs. And now I got into a disagreement with someone on Twitter, but I quickly saw that it was not going to be one that was going to be a winnable discussion, so to say, because when I said that the judge strawmanned what the plaintiffs, Trump and the individual plaintiffs were asking for, when the judgment starts off by saying, you are asking me to disenfranchise 6.5 million people, that is a straw man phrasing, even if that is the first conclusion, the straw man conclusion of what was being sought. The first conclusion was to block the certification because of anomalies. For a judge who's supposed to be the objective person on the bench to interpret that in the political spin side, that by blocking the certification, you're disenfranchising the voters who voted for, the person of their choice. That's the spin of the accurate way of describing it. So when he started off by saying that, I was like, holy cows, this is going to be, I won't say partisan, but this is going to be straw man drivel through and through, starting off with the mischaracterization of the first conclusion being sought and ignoring the subsidiary conclusions, which was, barring certification, just don't certify the ballots that had anomalies, which was totally ignored in the judgment. So I think that's the overall summary of the judgment. But I mean, get into it. Explain to us how this happens, what the essence of the judgment is, dismissing it on standing of the plaintiffs and standing of President Trump's campaign.
And really the backstory for this, the reason why they think all of these are Trump campaign suits, it's because how they do it. So when Mark Elias was challenging and coordinating the challenge to a bunch of signature matches, and his Democratic allies they often use Democratic public interest front groups to do the litigation. So it didn't look like the Democratic Party was particularly interested in not having signature matches happen this year. It was a sincere local group concerned with civil rights and grandma that was doing it. Democrats understand the presentation value of those things. But yes, you're correct. The first part of this is almost none of those suits were authorized by the Trump campaign. They've brought very few suits so far. Now, part of that is problematic in the sense that Trump's campaign should have been much better prepared for this contingency. And the problem is a lot of the Trump establishment world, legal establishment world, is not really pro-Trump. And a lot of them have conflicts. They have conflicts because they often represent Republican legislators or Republican executive branch people that are implicated if the election went wrong in some capacity. So they are, and that's part one. Part two, the legal class as a group, as a professional class as a group, is anti-Trump. They've always been anti-populist. So you have very few lawyers that are natural advocates for Trump. Most of them, even if they're nominally Republican, are likely to be in the never Trump category, ideologically and intellectually, or at least the Trump skeptical category. I mean, one of the people that is now one of his main advocates, Jenna Ellis, was a never Trumper in 2016. Not particularly helpful, frankly, but for now in the court of public opinion, because they're going to bring it up again and again and again. But it is what it is. That ship has sailed. But that's part of the problem. It's one of the reasons why I decided to go from being more of a private figure. My icon was more like Robert De Niro's character in Wag the Dog. That's how I prefer to get things done. But during the Trump era, it became clear there was going to be so few legal advocates defending Trump and Trump's constituency, and a lot of values related to that somebody needed to speak out, and that's why I chose to take a higher profile. But it was a systemic problem that there weren't a bunch. I think they kind of knew there weren't going to be. I started to realize why they were so cocky is that they had not gotten much pushback from anybody when they were doing all of these changes throughout 2020. When they were getting secretaries of state to issue ridiculous policies and procedures about signature matches, like the Michigan Secretary of State, that's just a crock, where she said maybe it's still a match if somebody goes from doing long cursive signatures to writing in block print. I mean, that's absurd. And yet that's what Democratic threats got. So, and the fact there wasn't a bunch of Republican lawyers fighting like crazy the other way, the fact they allowed some of these legislatures to even pass some of these laws, which were inane, which may be unconstitutional, according to a Pennsylvania congressman who's filed suit, unconstitutional under the Pennsylvania state constitution, which is an interesting aspect to that suit. But so they really weren't prepared. A little bit of that is on Trump. A lot of it is just because Trump came out of nowhere, seized power. There wasn't a populist group around him. And look at the three populist kind of people around him, or outsiders, that had been successful in the court of public opinion, that assisted Trump in some manner in 2016. Roger Stone and his group, Steve Bannon and his group, and Julian Assange and his group. Does anybody really think it's a coincidence that all three ended up criminally prosecuted? Just put that, and for those people who think Barnes hates conspiracy theories, that's why he doesn't like what Sidney, I have no problem pointing out things that I find problematic. That's why I like James O'Roy's book, Bloods Are Over, right there. That's why I'm recommending it for people. So it's a template to how power really operates, but also don't get caught in the disinformation campaign. That's essential. By the way, that was more proof to me that something's AWOL with the election. You don't need to launch a major disinformation campaign if you think an honest evaluation of the vote, an honest audit of the vote produces, it shows your candidate definitely won't win. Imagine somebody that's on the SEC saying, no, we can't audit our financials, but trust us, everything's fine. But please, whatever you do, don't audit the financials.
No, and I was thinking, it's preposterous that publicly traded companies have to file audited financial statements yearly, and you can't audit the most. But I mean, again, now the audit would do what now? Because actually, sorry, another question.
Multiple levels. The audit, a real audit, because what's great here is the elect. So after 2000 and the debacle of 2000, where we had a lot of machines that are even worse. I mean, we had 1% to 2% of people whose votes weren't counted because the machine screwed up. As we got the hanging Chad and all of that. So and you'd had variations between ballots between the counties. If Gore had requested a statewide recount, he might have won, by the way. He didn't understand the nature of variance, but that's another story for another day. It's not a coincidence that Georgia did a statewide recount. Let's just say that was a sage recommendation by a good lawyer down there, or who happened to be there. So the nature of it points to it. So go back to your question.
The question was the audit. What does an audit entail? But also the matching signatures. Nate, Kurt, and I did a stream last week where there was a disagreement as to whether or not there's signatures to match, because if they can track your ballot, it's not an anonymous ballot.
Well, here's the thing. The way election contests work is they don't really try to get into a guessing game as to who someone would have voted for, because that's often the case in an illegal vote circumstance. So let's say you prove a felon voted. You can't prove who they voted for. Let's say a dead person voted. You can't prove where that ballot, who cast that ballot, in fact, or who that ballot was cast in favor of. So the election contest standards is different. The election contest standards are not, can you prove who actually won? It's, can you put the margin of victory in doubt because there was more illegal ballots cast than the margin of victory? And the remedy has been one of two things: either a revote, a new election, or in the case of the presidency, the House delegations, voting by state delegation. So that's always been the remedy, and that's where there are people who are out there pushing for get rid of these votes and certify Trump the winner. And I always telling people that that's never going to work. That's not, they got away from that 30, 40 years ago. Now, somebody it worked for, Jimmy Carter, got his first office by proving there was voter fraud in Georgia, in part with the use of absentee ballots. That he challenged it, contested it, proved it, and they actually did give him the seat rather than a new election, is my recollection. Same with Obama, who got people knocked off. But so Democrats know how this game has worked. It's not a coincidence, by the way, that look at a lot of Democratic challenges. When they're trying to get third party and independents off the ballot, this is why I knew so much about this issue. They always strike the signatures. They always go the signature route, and they get at least 20%. And so, I was curious, like, hold on, it's 0.1% of 1%, 0.2% of 1%. I don't care if that's what you got in past elections. That just tells me you've never been following it, And a high-ranking public official in Georgia confirmed to me, he said, Bob, if you dig into the signature match, you're going to find a systematic problem in Georgia. So so there's no doubt, and you think that's different in Pennsylvania. Why are they all so scared of doing signature matches? The Secretary of State told the counties not to match the signatures in Pennsylvania. So we don't have we don't have the cover story coming out of Georgia. Out of Georgia, they were supposed to allow Republicans to observe it. They didn't. So going to an audit is all the United States election, and people don't take my word for it. You can go to nonpartisan independent commissions, look at the best practices guide by the Election Integrity Project. I'll put some of these links up and have been putting up some of them on our locals board. You can go to the United States Elections Commission, because after 2000, in the disaster, Congress passed legislation to improve elections in America. So that was one of the good benefits of what took place there. And one of the things they created was the United States Elections Assistance Commission. And they're the ones who created what's called risk limiting audits. And they go through all the things that you can do in a risk limiting audit. They created the template statute for risk limiting audits. And part of that has always been in a recanvas in their own United States Elections Assistance guidelines for elections management is you bring out the ballots, you bring out the absentee ballot applications, you bring out the envelopes, people can contest it and challenge it. And their whole thing is make everything about the election process open and transparent and monitored and independently confirmed by partisan people who have a motivation to question and challenge what you're doing, and make sure you have clean chain of custody. By the way, this is the kind of thing that gets missed when people are talking about computer internet hacking out of, some, 1980s movie. God bless Sidney Powell. Here's where you can actually create issues with Dominion software or technology. One of the problems is chain of custody of ballots. So here's what happens. A county will order, say, 10,000 ballots. They have to keep strict custody of who has them, who has access to them. Every person who touches a ballot is supposed to be kept somewhere. And so you send out certain numbers, some certain numbers you get back. You give out certain numbers of people who come in and vote in person, and you're supposed to double check. And as part of an audit process, make sure that you have as many ballots in the inventory. You don't have like 500 missing ballots, for example, things like that. So to make sure ballot custody is clean, because the ballot is the magical ballot. The ballot is the currency of power. And the old school ballot stuffing was you just printed out extra ballots and stuffed them in. Now there's some of that you can't always capture or catch with this kind of stuff, but usually when somebody's committing enough fraud, there's other things that will pop up. But here, this is where Dominion's paper ballot machines are a problem. There's ceaseless amounts of paper ballots because they just have blank paper, and they frequently will run tests. And so they'll do test ballots of the actual ballot. Well, they need to spoil those ballots because those are marked ballots. Now, they're supposed to have serial numbers, so you can look at the serial numbers and make sure nothing's out of touch. This is where being able to monitor a hand recount is important. You can see if there's ballots that look weird. Like, how do you have an absentee ballot should have creases in it, and because it's you fold it up and mail it in. If it doesn't, that's a little odd. If you have ballots with perfectly marked little indicators, the perfect, almost like a machine filled it out, but it's supposed to be an absentee ballot, and it's Biden only and nobody else. Because people were telling me, my political science friends who are now, who have been objecting to election issues forever, but now that Biden won, suddenly it's the most perfect election in human history. Have been telling me, no, Bob, that's just a drop off. There's always a drop off. And I'm like, okay, then what we shouldn't find is Biden only ballots. That it should be a mixture of Trump people voting Democrat or Republican, or shifting party down ballot. Same with Biden people. But that's not what we're finding. We are finding Biden only ballots that look like perfect ballots, perfectly filled in bubbles. So you were so dedicated to filling in a perfect bubble for Biden that you didn't mark anyone else on the ticket. And there's a strong overlay between Stacey Adams' overvote in 2018. Don't take my word for it. The lieutenant governor, Democrat, filed an election contest in Georgia saying there was a mysterious overvote. Now, they claim that vote should have gone to them. Maybe it was just Stacey Abrams paid some people and other people didn't. That overlaps with Joe Biden's overvote in certain areas. And this is one reason I was critical of the Sidney Powell stuff. That key data that's real evidentiary inferences of something wrong, it gets swamped when you're saying every county in the entire country had a 6% magical overvote and California voted for Trump. The judge's eyes go like this. So there are specific anomalies that substantiate Trump's theory. And people have been thinking I've changed my view on the election. I have not. I have zero doubt that an honest vote would have elected Donald J. Trump president. The question is, will we get one?
Now, there's a lot of comments going on in the comment section. I can't bring all of them up. First of all, am I going crazy, or did everyone's icon always have the little YouTube play button in it, or is that a new thing? Because I don't remember everyone's avatar having that little red YouTube button, but everyone has it now. Okay, so in Pennsylvania, incidentally, so the judge dismisses the lawsuit. It's dismissed on standing, and on two different types of standing. It said that the plaintiffs were filing a equal protections lawsuit, but that they did not show that they were prejudiced by the practice that they were complaining about. And the practice in that lawsuit was certain counties were given certain instructions or not prohibited from having ballots cured in the event that they were deficient, whereas other counties were not. And the allegation, although apparently the judge didn't think it was clear from the lawsuit, was that it was heavily Democratic counties that were instructed to cure their ballots or allowed to cure their ballots. Heavily Republican counties were not. So unequal treatments for the same vote, and therefore constitutional violation. The judge said that they did not suffer any prejudice. And so, I mean, are you able to explain that away to people who might think this was prematurely dismissed?
Just contrast the kind of standing they're finding for in past elections, including just recent ones. In 2018, they went to great lengths to find standing for any issue related to absentee ballots when it was Democrats suing. So the standing has always been a BS excuse of judges not to do their job. And to be frank, if I had been arguing in Pennsylvania, I would have made it as blunt as that. In a political case like this, you have to let the judge know you're going to put him on blast. Particularly, you're walking into a hostile judge, because if you understand Federalist Society plus Obama means you're double screwed. If you understand that dynamic, that's how you approach it. And you just politically put it right in front of them. Now, it has been my long advice throughout this process that you ask for reasonable remedy and you bring your strongest claims. And that hasn't always been done, frankly. So don't ask for ballots to be thrown out. Don't ask for that at all. Simply say, all we want is to see what the evidence shows as to whether a signature match took place here, as to whether or not different notice and cure standards were applied. And we just want effectively an audit, and we want to know what happened. And all we're asking is to know what happened, because then judges know they're going to look like fraudulent idiots when they don't let you have it. They might still do that to you. They might be willing to take that gamble because they hate Trump that much, but make them do that. Make them expose themselves to the world. Make them bare their naked, ugly souls to the universe, and then see if they're willing to go there. And that's, I think, so there were weaknesses to a standing as a bogus doctrine. It is simply an excuse of judges to say, oh, I can't handle this case. It's politically manipulated all the time. I can find you in almost any case involving standing. Outside of people who say they have standing because they're taxpayers, the courts have been pretty consistent. But other than that, I can almost always find you courts that have contradicted each other, often the same courts contradicting each other. So I don't take it seriously, the standing doctrine he raised. Also, some of his other arguments were just bogus, frankly.
Well, so he distinguished. He said standing is the issue. So incidentally, the standing was determinate for both plaintiffs, the individuals and the Trump campaign. But he said even the Bush v. Gore is not analogous, because that was only, and I might not say this right. The Bush v. Gore only related to recounts in specific districts and not instructions that were given to various districts. And so it's only normal that different counties have different ways of curing ballots, are given different instructions. And so it's to be distinguished from the Bush v. Gore on that basis, which not to say I didn't see the distinction, but I didn't know if I was misunderstanding something.
No, it was he couldn't make an intellectually honest distinction. So he just pretended that it was something significant. I mean, here, the point they were making was not that my vote should have counted. Their point was that these other votes should not have counted. And that's why they had standing, that their vote didn't count because they didn't have a notice and cure. And that's what the state law was, no notice and cure. For those that don't know, it means there's something wrong with your absentee ballot. You're given an opportunity you're given notice and 3 days to cure it. And by the way, a lot of it is required in some states because Democrats have been suing for the last 2 years, trying to force it on a bunch of states. So it means, hey, if you get caught cheating the first time, you get a second chance too. That's what I see a lot of that as. But the Democratic counties or counties where they expect a lot of Democratic mail-in votes allowed notice and cure to occur, and other counties didn't. And to pretend that he should have sued the idea that the notice and cure he presumed was the right policy when it's the wrong policy because it violates the law. So that argument he made was bogus, and some of it was just frankly intellectually dishonest. And then the third about saying the candidates doesn't have competitive standing is nonsense. Now, there is a Third Circuit recent decision that he could cite for that, but that makes no sense. And because you notice at the end, he says, I'm not saying in all cases a party couldn't have competitive standing. And what he meant to say was, when my politics favors it, next time I'll change my view on standing. And I would have been the one, if I was in that courtroom, I would have made that clear right to his face. Because in a political case like this, you got to wage whole-scale war. You cannot be nice and polite and diplomatic and differential and any of that jazz. You have to put him on blast, let him take his shots. That's why, by the way, you need the strongest facts. You don't need to let crazy conspiracy theories that make it easy for them to disbar you or sanction you.
And it's, remind me about the disbarring, Robert, before we forget. But also, going back to the laundry list, Scott Adams, throw it all out there, and it's good for public opinion and what's the word, persuasion. I am also of the opinion you don't ask for what you know the judge is not going to grant. So while I said, the judge strawmanned their conclusions because he interpreted the don't certify to be disenfranchise 6 million people. But that someone can do that when they want to spin it that way. And that that's not going to happen anyhow, because the argument is going to be, look, you're disenfranchising 6 million people if you count illegal votes, and you're disenfranchising 6 million people if you throw out their votes because of a tainted process. So one way or another, someone's going to potentially be disenfranchised. But the judge is not going to stop certification of everything. So there's no point even asking for it.
Exactly. And my view was that it was a politically unpalatable remedy, so don't seek it. Secondly, I thought it was a bad idea for Trump in general to be seeking the courts to declare him the winner. Go through the constitutional process. Go to the constitutional process of letting the House decide, letting the elected representatives decide. Simply show that we don't know who won those elections. And it was most likely Trump, but that's not something that's subject to proof at this point once the ballot has been separated from the voter, which it has universally here. Once that has happened, by the way, that's why they do that. That's why they don't have people to monitor when they were checking those. They didn't have anybody there to monitor signatures, unlike what the Detroit judge said when he kind of lied about it. Said, oh, you could have walked through the orientation. No, they couldn't have. They weren't invited to the orientation.
Actually, an even better one from this Pennsylvania decision. I don't think I'm going to do a video on it because it's too meticulous and I don't think it's going to be interesting. And I'll probably just rerun this highlight. He said, one of the standings, you didn't get prejudiced by not being allowed to observe the count because no one was allowed, or they kicked out everybody, Democrats and Republicans. Therefore, you didn't suffer a specific prejudice, which I'm like, first of all, even if that's true, the fact that he would say that everyone recognizes people were kicked out, there's a problem. To say that, oh, well, they kicked out Democrats and Republican observers, so you didn't suffer specific harm, therefore you have no standing because you did not suffer, in fact, harm. I mean, that's like saying they were alleging that the corruption came from one side. To say that both parties, including the side that's affecting the problem, were kicked out, therefore nobody was harmed or everybody was harmed, intellectually dishonest, but it's just arguing from a conclusion as opposed to towards one. It was clear from the opening paragraph. But, like you say.
And what is the suit, by its structure, by its nature, by some of its requested remedy, by some of the oral argument made, gave him easier openings. And that's where my view was, make it as hard as possible for the judges to screw you. They may still do so, but make it hard for them to do it. Make it so that they know when they go home that night what they did. And every other judge know that the whole world's going to know over time what they did. And that's the only way you're going to persuade a judge to give some relief, some remedy. And if they really believe there was no fraud, then they shouldn't be worried about an honest audit.
And incidentally, this is another good point. Tassa says the judge in Pennsylvania didn't see all the evidence. Are they still able to present more to the appeals or Supreme Court? Another talking point. Another lawsuit dismissed. This lawsuit was dismissed on a motion to dismiss, so there was no evidence presented above and beyond the four corners of the proceedings itself. So they didn't actually get to present evidence. The judge just sort of, the interpretation is you interpret the lawsuit in the most favorable light in order to dismiss. But this was a motion to dismiss for failure to state a claim, unless I'm not mistaken, right?
Correct. It was solely he couldn't have standing. He took pot shots at what evidence was or was not presented, while not talking about the fact that he didn't allow an evidentiary hearing to occur. Yeah, it was more additional. Like there was a way he could have, if he could have done this the way the Georgia judge is likely to do it. A Trump appointee, but another Federal Society guy, a guy I have tangled with when he was at the tax division. So I was not too surprised by how he approached things. And it's another sign. It goes back to why I didn't like Barrett. These Federal Society folks are, compare them to how Republican judges rushed to W's defense. Compare to all the corporate law firms that rushed to W's defense in 2000 to what's happening to Trump, where they're abandoning him, undermining him, and not following through. So it's a sign that we need to purge the Federalist Society from control and monopoly over powerful positions on the Republican side. And it'll be something maybe might be part of an objective over the next 4 years. And this might provide particular good political evidence in support of it. But yes, you're right. He didn't, as to whether evidence can be heard, they can look at they have to presume all the evidence is true for the purposes of appeal, because this was a rule 11 motion to dismiss, I think that was the rule they filed on, just a motion to dismiss that has to assume all facts are true, which, by the way, made it problematic for him to then take pot shots at facts.
It's the same thing. It's the same MO that the judge in Michigan did. He's dismissing it on a technicality that the relief for injunctive relief is not required because there's other remedies, while also undermining the evidence that, I mean, he heard it in Michigan, because they didn't hear actual evidence. They just read the proceedings. And someone just asked, and I guess a lot of people are asking, you've said it a few times, but what does Trump have to do? Courts are not going to decide. So what does he have to do to get this to be a political resolution? Does he have to hold up the votes through litigation? Does he have to show enough anomaly in order for the states to say we can't certify because there's enough anomalies? And if so, how does he have to go about showing those anomalies or proving them?
Almost all the states have an election contest proceeding, a little bit more complicated in Wisconsin, but Pennsylvania has an election contest proceeding. It just has to be filed by tomorrow. Georgia has an election contest proceeding. Arizona has an election contest proceeding. There's already a election contest proceeding on behalf of the Trump campaign filed in Nevada. And he just needs for the Electoral College to not have 270, for Biden not to have more than 270 votes. Now, that can happen by them not certifying electors. That can the court saying you can't do it because the election's in doubt. It goes to, I put up on our locals board, the Viva barneslaw.locals.com, the link in the description below. I'm learning that term.
I'll post it right now. All 3 links, just a repost. Yeah,
but it goes to the whole election contest process. So it's really pre-election is when you're filing federal and state courts to deal with the pre-election certification process. Those suits frankly are often unsuccessful. That's not normal. So the media trying to make a big deal out of that doesn't really mean anything. And honestly, if we had an honest court system, you shouldn't be at 34-1. They think this is good. And I think they don't understand how at least Trump world's going to interpret that as, oh, our judiciary is really that corrupt. that somehow 34 out of 35 challenges weren't good. There weren't 2 out of 35 that were good. That isn't, they don't sit there and say, oh, judges are neutral arbiters who have determined that we are all full of it. That's not how they're going to interpret that. And they're right to be skeptical. Just simply the risk of human error makes it so. But that's part one. Part two, the next challenge is post-certification. And once there's certification by elected officials, then you can file election contests. Often the certification is the trigger. Pennsylvania is the only exception. Pennsylvania, you have to file suit 20 days within election day. And there's a few others, Tennessee and some other places that don't matter for this purpose. But in Arizona and in Georgia, they've already filed it in Nevada. In Arizona and in Georgia and in Michigan, you can file it usually within 5 days, sometimes 10 days of whenever there's certification. So that challenge, all you have to say, and like I said, there's templated of a Georgia one that's up on the board. I'll put some other templates up there. Let's not use the word template. We'll call them exemplars that other people may happen to choose to use. And I'm just asserting I'm abandoning publicly all copyright claim to it.
People can find it by Googling it. So it's condensing information.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Just providing public access to the court system that the Constitution provides for, and how you choose to use it is up to you. But it's real simple how you can file. Anyone can file an election contest. Now in Pennsylvania, it requires 100 people to join it, 5 people to swear verified affidavits. But in Arizona and Georgia, just one person can does a verified affidavit, and they can contest the election themselves.
Craig Lino says, can the Supreme Court order a complete canvass audit? I mean, I guess I'll just finish the question. Sorry. Recount of all the states in question, or will it be too late by the time it gets to them?
They always can. Frankly, they should have got involved prior to the election to put a stop to all this nonsense, which they could have done. But Barrett decided, it'd be so confusing and so difficult for me to come up to speed, even though I'm the smartest justice ever, according to all her Federalist Society friends. So I'm going to be bitter about that for a while, because we're in this disaster because Barrett took a walk like some of us said she would do.